Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the degree conferring ceremony, which is really a highlight in the life of the EUI community. I would be grateful if you make sure that your cell phones are switched off to start with, so please check this. And secondly, you will find on your chairs headsets that can be used in areas of the church where the sound is a bit weaker so that you can hear us better. I'm very pleased to invite the President of the EUI, Professor Renaud de Hoes, for his welcome address.
Dear graduates, dear families and friends, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to open this 2019 conferring ceremony. Today is, of course, a special day for our graduates, who will see in a few moments the crowning of years of patient efforts. Sharing their satisfaction at this special moment is, of course, a great joy for all of us. It's often said that one of the best indicators of the quality of an institution of higher education is the quality of its students. It's therefore a great source of pride for me to hear our professors or our many visitors say that one of the great assets of this place is the quality of its students, who are a source of great inspiration and contribute greatly to the quality of the research that is done here. I also feel the same pride when I look at the career path of their predecessors, who are now occupying prominent positions in a wide number of institutions across Europe. Dear graduates, we know that this place is unique in so many respects. So much so, actually, that it may at times be difficult for us, I'm sure you've experienced that as I have, difficult to explain to outsiders what it actually is, what we actually do here, and why we do it the way we do it. True, an EUI experience may be a challenging one, but I think that for most people it is a formidable experience from which they gain a lot, from the exposure to a wide variety of cultures, of schools of thought, of personalities, from the many encounters of all kinds that one can make here. If you believe in the intrinsic value of diversity, as is my case, those are undoubtedly precious opportunities. Nonetheless, it is important to recognize that the world of today is perhaps less open to this worldview than when this institute was established. Some of the cardinal principles on which it was built, the openness to the other, mutual respect, trust in the value of scientific reasoning, to mention but a few, are now openly challenged. For the first time, one of the countries that have taken part in the founding of this institute has announced its intention to withdraw. Whether this will ultimately happen and what implications it may have will, of course, have to be seen. But the sheer fact that such an absurd thing may happen, despite the widespread recognition that in the world of science, borders are not particularly helpful, this is indeed telling of the world we currently live in. I emphasize these elements because I do believe that they are likely to have some bearing on your first step in the career that you have chosen. Let me also stress another point that seems important to me. It is often said that our time is characterized by a division, not to say a tension, between, on the one hand, the people from somewhere whose identity is shaped by a sense of place and attachment to a group, and on the other, the people from anywhere whose identity is not tied to place, but rather to their achievements and position. Well, let me say this. Stimulating as this dichotomy may be, it fails to capture some key distinguishing features of this place. Of course, we do attach great importance to our students' achievements. That's our job. And we have full faith in their ability to reach prominent positions, as I said. But this notwithstanding, it is important to recognize that people here also develop a strong, let me say, communal identity. I was thinking of this yesterday while watching the thrilling final of the Coppa Pavone. Although this at times obscure tribal rite cannot claim a great antiquity, it clearly has a strong structural power on the group. And it seems to me that this is not without ties with the local culture. I could, of course, think of other examples, but I guess you see the point I wish to make. People who have been here are not mere anywheres. They also have found a somewhere which has shaped their identity. This you will see later when you will meet your peers, be it at a conference or in some private gathering. And arguably, this integration function is part and parcel of our mission. With this, I conclude. We wish you all the best in your future career, which we will be following closely. Stay with us. As I said, you belong here. And now, let me give the floor to Baroness O'Neill, Professor Emeritus at Cambridge University, who has kindly accepted to give the keynote address of this conferring ceremony. Thank you.
Honored Rector, dear colleagues, dear friends and families who have traveled a long way, and above all, dear graduates, dear researchers who have completed your work so recently. To them, congratulations. I think also some congratulations to everyone who taught and supervised and was there when you found that an argument didn't quite work, or the evidence didn't quite take the shape that you hoped. Many of us remembered the time when we completed graduate and research studies, and we remember it, I think, as exciting times and as opening the doors to futures for which we hoped. But if I'm honest, I think it was also a time at which uncertainty was quite high. What would the future bring? We could, many of us, see only a short way ahead, and perhaps that is the same for you today. I don't know. I hope not too much so. So I think you're living in interesting times. Now, in a way, all times are interesting, but there is, of course, a more ominous tone to that phrase, because we're told that it is an ancient Chinese warning or curse. May you live in interesting times. So I asked myself when thinking about this occasion, are our times the times in which you will make your mark in the world, are they particularly interesting? And in what ways, and what's distinctive? And I believe that there are two trends, both very incomplete and much disputed, which make it indeed, alas and hurrah, all too interesting. Let me set that thought in context. I begin with some reminiscence, not of the time when I first graduated, but some years later, the magical year 1989 to 90. I have a competitor. I spent that year at the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, and at the beginning of that year we could not imagine that the landscape of Europe and of the world would change. And it did change, and I had the good fortune, by sheer chance, to be an eyewitness to the symbolic moment of change, because I was at the Brandenburger Tor before the television cameras that night. And I remember that moment, standing in the dark, and a young man on his bike came towards us and said, "I've just been in East Berlin, just with my Berlin ID." I went to and fro and to and fro, and one of us said, "Well, what about the Vorpus, the Volkspolizei?" He said, "You've never seen such sweet Vorpus." It was a magical moment to realize that people who were doing what would have got them shot days before were doing this. And of course, as things unrolled faster than one could imagine in the winter of 89-90 and the following summer, it seemed as if democracy and a rules-based international order were being made more secure, and the threats of the Cold War era were lifting. That Cold War had, of course, been there since before most of us could remember. So optimism was very high. And we also were, at that very time, welcoming not merely a more liberal, rules-based international order, but the nascent technologies of digital communication. That's to say, we had computers, we didn't have the internet, which many of us imagined pointed to a future in which communication would be profoundly democratized. That, of course, was something that Jürgen Habermas had said at that particular point. The cyber romantics of that time, because I think that's what they were, they looked with enthusiasm to a world in which communication would be wider, deeper, better. All seemed fair for a democratic future. Both the fall of the wall, that metaphor for globalization, and the advance of digital technologies seemed for some time benign and were welcomed. And they have indeed brought and enabled many benefits in many parts of the world. The thought that in Africa, mobile phone technology is providing what the infrastructure cannot provide is amazing. However, the interaction between globalization and digital technologies is proving, as you all know, problematic in many ways. This November 2019, will be 30 years on from the fall of the wall. We find ourselves in a time in which we are seeing some of the pigeons coming home to roost. Globalization, combined with digital technologies, has, we know, enabled corporations to offshore their operations when this is convenient or profitable or both. It has enabled rich individuals to offshore their assets and to avoid paying tax in the jurisdictions where their poorer compatriots live. And it has enabled states and their security apparatuses to intervene covertly in the political affairs, elections, and referenda of other states. This has obviously profound effects. The loss of tax revenue is one obvious effect, but also that interference in democracy is another. And we begin to know what happened, both in the election of the President of the United States and in the Brexit referendum in the UK, but we do not even know completely who was campaigning, funded by whom, to achieve results. It certainly was not entirely the citizens. So the rise of populist resentment about these transformations is, I think, wholly understandable, and it's a profound challenge to the assumption, you may say the unfounded hope, that we are heading towards a rules-based international order which will secure human rights, the rule of law, and democratic progress. Those, so to speak, were the promises of 1989, and now I think they are being challenged in deep ways. Now, there are, of course, several treasured liberal responses to these changes. We must, it is said, do more and more energetically to ensure that there is a rules-based international order, to respect human rights everywhere for all, to prevent those who seek to undermine that order and profit at others' expense by so doing. I do not disagree with those hopes for 1 second, but I think that the tools that are at our disposal may not be adequate to the task we face. To my mind, one of the most interesting changes of recent months has been to see the great tech companies of the Western world come to the conclusion, and very reluctantly, but they have come to the conclusion that they do need regulation, and they no longer mean just self-regulation. They mean regulation by the public institutions of states. Of course, we have to remember in the back of our minds that the great tech companies of China have long accepted that conclusion. They have accepted that regulation is necessary, and regulation is being used in that jurisdiction to regulate the citizens, not the companies. And I think that that should give us pause. Could it be the case that these communications technologies, which 30 years ago we naively thought were going to contribute to democratization, liberalization, and a rules-based international order, are actually far more handy and useful for those who want to have unwarranted totalitarian control over the lives of individual citizens. The evidence is out, but if you read about the Chinese situation, it is indeed depressing. So we have, on the one hand, surveillance capitalism, about which we fuss quite a lot in the Western world, but we also have surveillance totalitarianism, which is doing just fine. Thank you. Now, we all remember Mr. Zuckerberg's claim that the new technologies and the business models that support them should be used to, I quote him, move fast and break things. Extraordinary thing for him to say, wasn't it? The assumption at the time was, I suspect, that all those things that were going to be broken were dispensable and indeed damaging, and we'd be well rid of them. They were meant, for example, those intermediaries who controlled or suppressed the free flow of information and discussion. They meant censors and the censorious. They meant the enemies of freedom, diversity, the rule of law, and the rules-based international order. However, what has actually got broken isn't just confined to bad things. If we look at the tally of what has been broken, the picture is simply not very comfortable. I'd start with something which bears on your own lives in the future. Writers. This is a humble source of evidence, but I think it's worthwhile. If you look at the Writers and Authors Copyright and Licensing Society in the United Kingdom, of which I'm a member, I declare an interest, you will find that the incomes of writers have been going like that. If you look, on the other hand, at the situation of serious journalism, you find again that the number of people employed as serious journalists in media that matter to us all if we care about democracy and the rules-based international order, you will find that the number of employed journalists of that sort is declining. In their place, of course, we have the development of bloggers and influencers who speak for themselves and perhaps for nobody else. Those standards which serious journalism in all the democratic countries has sought to meet are now under some threat. That oxymoronic term, fake news, says it all. If it's fake, it isn't news. If it's news, it isn't fake. And we are seeing a cascade of claims about the need for online regulation. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the World Wide Web, last September came out and said, we thought it was so promising. We felt that cyberspace should be for everyone. And now we see that it has created ghastly results. We have seen, of course, attempts to deal with this, such as the much praised, and it isn't useless, data protection legislation of the European Union. It isn't useless, but it is built upon a fundamental incoherence, which is that we have a definition of personal data which we are going to protect. I think that is an illusion. Personal data cannot be defined, and data are not discovered by illegal or casual disclosure of private matters. Data are nowadays discovered by inference, and very often by inference in which the human input is quite remote. So my guess is that we have got, and your generation has its work cut out for it. I hope very much, and I think, that we will find ways to deal with the private harms that the new technologies cause. The private harms, cyberbullying, extreme pornography, defamation, fraud, a lot of private harms. The reason I think that we may see these dealt with adequately is that it is very much in the interest of the technology companies not to be seen as the source of child pornography, not to be seen as the source of defamation. So I sort of think that they will be quite keen to see regulation introduced on these matters. Whether the way in which people are thinking about regulation is adequate will be another matter. And at present we have to face the fact that the new technologies have turned out to be far more useful for non-democratic states. So we have a conflict brewing. Will it be surveillance states or surveillance capitalism that proves more durable? I do not know the answer. Will the liberal states, to which the post-Cold War world was taken to point, prove adequate to their challenges? I think it depends very much on you and your contemporaries who are emerging from our elite institutions to carry the reform forward. I think, therefore, we can be pretty confident. You're going to live and work in interesting times. They cannot but be interesting. But what we all hope is that you will forge better times to come for our successors. Thank you all, and congratulations.
Please don't.
We will now proceed with the awarding of the Doctor Honoris Causa Degrees, and I invite Honorary Promoter Professor Joanne Scott to address Honorary Doctor Professor Christine Shinken.
Do we share glasses of water at the EUI? I'm laughing. It's fine. In 1991, when she was a lecturer at the Australian National University, Christine Shinken co-authored an article with Hilary Charlesworth and Shelley Wright called Feminist Approaches to International Law. Marking the beginning of an enduring collaboration with Hilary Charlesworth, this piece, and I quote, opened the eyes of most English-speaking lawyers to the gendered boundaries of international law and marked feminism's entrance through the front door of the international legal establishment. Almost 10 years after that path-breaking article, Charlesworth and Shinken published a book applying feminist theories to international law. This provided feminist perspectives on the structure, processes, and norms of international law. They argued that the absence of women in the development of international law produced a narrow and inadequate jurisprudence. This fundamental imbalance both legitimated the unequal position of women in the world and created and reproduced a strong structural bias against women. What was striking about this book was the willingness of these authors to tackle the sacred cows of international law from a feminist perspective. The sources of international law, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the concept of the state. It was perhaps because of this, their entry into the mainstream of international law, and again I quote, that their critiques initially produced shock and even ire. Academic grenades were lobbed at these radical feminists, not content with reformist moves within specialities presumed to be suited to women's concerns. And indeed, in conversation this morning, Christine recounted a moment where a progressive senior public international lawyer said to her, you know, you're actually quite good at international law when you do the proper stuff rather than feminist perspectives. This notwithstanding, Christine carried on, and her focus as a scholar has been on promoting and protecting women's human rights. Her research has demonstrated how initiatives to protect women's rights have often operated with a narrow understanding of non-discrimination, a model of equality that works best for women when they participate in the public sphere, but which is deficient in identifying and addressing the structural inequalities that prevent women from accessing the public sphere. She has shown how international law and international processes have traditionally been blind to violations of women's rights when they're committed against women because they are women, and has explored over many years the state's responsibility for addressing gender-based violence against women by non-state actors, particularly in a family or community setting. Christine's expertise on the development of legal mechanisms to tackle violence against women in conflict and post-conflict situations made her the perfect choice as the founding director of the London School of Economics Centre for Women, Peace and Security. This was launched in 2015 in the august company of William Hague, a little dull, and Angelina Jolie, noticeably less dull, and all of this precisely at the time when Christine had intended to announce her retirement. Speaking in 2011 in a lecture entitled Feminism and International Law, 20 years after Charlesworth, Shinken and Wright, nice title, Juan Amano Castro observed, the degree to which women's issues fell beyond the reach of human rights bodies 20 or so years ago is harrowing. And the degree to which this has now changed deserves admiration and respect. Activists and scholars combined forces and achieved significant results. With Christine, her activism and her scholarship are closely tied. She is both a scholar and, as the title of an article about her in the medical journal The Lancet proclaimed, she is also a defender of human rights. Christine Shinken's work has achieved significant real-world impact, contributing to the recognition of gender-based violence against women as a breach of international human rights law. She has been engaged in a theoretical project that has been oriented towards achieving practical results. For example, Christine was one of 2 scientific advisors to an ad hoc committee set up to draft the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, a convention that entered into force in 2014. This convention focuses on eliminating all forms of violence against women and adopts a holistic, comprehensive legal framework to prevent violence against women, to protect survivors of violence, and to end impunity for perpetrators. Christine had at this point been arguing in her scholarship for a long time that failure by a state to exercise due diligence to prevent and punish violence against women constitutes a violation of international human rights law. This has been recognized by the Istanbul Convention, which requires states to take the necessary measures to exercise due diligence to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide reparation for acts of violence against women that are perpetrated by non-state actors. Somewhere, as I approach the end of my remarks, having found the relevant page, I would hate to leave you with the impression that Christine is merely an accomplished and influential scholar and scholar activist. Her interests beyond work are many and shaped by her environment. Growing up in Porthcawl in South Wales, overlooking the Bristol Channel, Christine became an enthusiastic walker and sailor. Having served as the Dean of the University of Southampton Law Faculty, Christine remains a loyal supporter of Southampton Football Club, otherwise known as the Saints. I looked up the Premier League before I came today. I would say loyal and long-suffering supporter, perhaps. In London, Christine is an avid theatre goer, and I have been told by a source no less reliable than Professor Nicola Lacey that Christine and her husband Paul have recently trained their kitten to walk alongside them when they walk down to the River Thames. And who gives the impression that people from the United Kingdom are eccentric? Christine is the most generous and supportive of colleagues. She has enriched her academic life and the academic lives of others, including my own, by building strong and enduring friendships with her colleagues and collaborators across the world, including in the US, Australia, and Singapore, where she has worked. She is an outstanding role model for the young scholars and the young scholar activists who are graduating today. I started to write a final paragraph listing some of Christine's achievements, but it would go on too long, so I will list only one. Christine has accepted to present the distinguished lecture at the Academy of European Law here at the EUI next week, an accolade that no serious curriculum can be without. But I'm going to end with the words of Madeleine Rees, who's now the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and with whom Christine has worked closely over the years in the United Nations in seeking to improve access to justice for women. Of Christine, Madeleine has said, "There are many who know the law," and Christine certainly does know the law, "but there are few who can bring their feminism, their passion for equality and human rights into that legal world and make sense of it. Christine is one of a kind." Thank you. I present Christine Shinken for admission to the Honorary degree of Doctor of the European University Institute.
Ben, shake hands. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much indeed, Professor Scott, Joe, for that very, very warm, and it's very, very difficult to hear yourself described and think, now what do I say about that? But first and foremost, thank you, and thank you to the university for this great honour. And secondly, I think firstly, congratulations to all of you on this great day, and it's great to be joining you as part of the graduating class. Now, I think Joe actually pulled out two things that are really important. One, it is not a great punishment supporting the saints. Yes, it's difficult, there are bad moments, but nevertheless, there are perhaps a few moments of pleasure. But far more importantly has been her emphasis on my work for women's human rights, which I regard as being central to both my academic and my personal life. And so I've just been reflecting a bit on 40 years. 1979, 40 years ago this year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. This is the UN's blueprint for the promotion and guarantee of women's human rights. And the preamble noted the extensive discrimination against women that then existed. So just to take a few examples from my own field of public international law. In 1979, there had never been a woman judge on the International Court of Justice, the top judicial organ of the United Nations. Nor had there ever been a woman member of the International Law Commission, the body for the progressive development of international law. Nor a woman president of the Security Council. The General Assembly had elected a woman judge as far back as 1953, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit from India. But since 1953 to date, there have just been 3 other women judges president of the General Assembly. If we go outside international governments to the numbers of women in global politics generally, 1979, my country, the UK, had just 3% of women MPs, although admittedly we did elect a woman MP, Prime Minister, that year. The first direct elections to the European Parliament were held in 1979. Women made up just 16% of the MEPs in 1979. And gender-based violence, that has just been talked about, wasn't even recognised as being an issue of international importance or international human rights law. So, 40 years ago, where are we now today? So, a very brief snapshot for today. We now have 3 out of 15 women judges of the ICJ. In the ILC, the International Law Commission, there are 4 members out of 30 shown on the picture on the website. At the European Parliament, 36% of the 751 MEPs are women. And worldwide, as of January the 1st, 2019, 24.3% of national parliamentarians are women. Earlier this month, a couple of weeks ago, a global index was published that measures progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, the globally accepted goals for ensuring that by 2030, no one is left behind. This report showed that in no single country in the world are they on track to achieve global equality by 2030. But I think there's a further issue which has really been talked about by everyone today. I think we always assumed that, yes, there would be progress. It might be snail's space, it might be something that we're still looking toward, but there would be progress. But that now is clearly not the case. What we are seeing currently is pushback from the hard-won gains with respect to women's reproductive choice and autonomy, restrictive abortion laws, increasing threats to women in public life, to women human rights defenders worldwide who are targeted and killed simply for standing up for their rights. And in the words of the Canadian Prime Minister, to quote, individuals and interest groups try to roll back women's rights, but politicians are giving in to that pressure. shamelessly campaigning to undo hard-won victories. But pushback can and must be resisted. So if I'm allowed one single message to you today as you're all going off on your great new ventures, is to uphold the values of the European Union, the values of universal values of human dignity, freedom, equality and solidarity. They're developed in Chapter 3 of the European Charter on Fundamental Rights, and that is to the chapter on equality. And the chapter on equality, of course, doesn't refer just to women, but to everyone who is discriminated against on the basis of their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexuality, their gender identity, or any other ground at all. Those who deny the right to equality to all can be challenged, and the global vision of a global equal society need not be lost. Go away and do your best to keep up that vision of equality. Congratulations to you all, and thank you again.
Professor Shinken, by the authority vested in me, I admit you to the honorary degree of Doctor of the European University Institute.
Thank you very much indeed.
I invite Honorary Promoter Professor Arpad Abraham to address the Honorary Doctor Professor Per Krussel.
Good afternoon to all. Mr. President, graduating students, colleagues, distinguished guests, and Per. I will start this laudatio with a personal note, with a longish personal note. I started to think more carefully about what to say when Per, and I apologize for the informality, but if you know Per, you know that it wouldn't make sense to call him Professor Krussel, asked me in his humble ways, why did you choose me? At that point, it struck me that I have to come up with something, especially because I cannot really say that our team doesn't have enough players for the second week of the Coppa Pavone, and he could possibly help, which he could. Then I started to go through, as standard practice requires, his research contribution and his achievements. And indeed, they show an amazing amount of versatility, a great number of high-impact contributions to understanding of the economy and the society, with topics ranging from inequality, climate change, technological change, or the politics of taxation. But probably this is not the right temperature and occasion for going through them in detail. So, and more importantly, the main reason why Per is the perfect candidate for being an honorary doctor of the EUI lies somewhere else. I believe that Per is, or at least should be, the role model not only for economics but for social scientists here at the EUI and beyond. And I will use my laudatio to try to explain you why do I think this is the case. And it is all because of his approach to be a scholar. I would describe it in 3 words. Per's approach to be a scholar is courageous, curiosity-driven, and he is an educator. And what I'm going to do in the remaining 2 or 3 minutes, I will try to talk a little bit why I think he is courageous and what does it really mean. So in this stage, all of us, it happens very often that we sit together in some combination and we say something like this. This is a great research question, but it is just too hard, too complex, too politically sensitive, so you better find another topic. This would never happen with Per. He would never take this as an answer. He is not shy to tackle difficult problems, and like this, he managed to lead the way for us, studying some questions that previously thought to be too hard and too sensitive. I will give you, and incidentally, they happen to be some of the most important questions of these days. And I will give you 3 examples. The first one is, he was the one who told us how we can understand economic fluctuations, booms and recessions affecting inequality in the society. Of course, this is again one of the most important questions we deal with these days. The second issue, which is, now we talk about Brexit and many other issues, is equally important, how policies are designed and implemented if governments are not able to commit to future actions. So he led us the way to understand how we can approach these questions. The third one is something which I feel really affected by wearing this black gown today, is how climate change is affecting regions across the world and how it affects households with different skills and income differently. Now I move to curiosity-driven. This is again typical in social scientists. We are often accused, most often by each other, that we already know the answer to our research question before even starting the project. Again, this would never happen with Per. His research is always trying to understand deeply what are the causes of empirical patterns, what are the consequences of change through individual or collective actions, without being dogmatic or ideological, neither about the question nor about the answer. This humble, curiosity-driven approach allowed him to explore and unveil many new areas in economics. And lastly, but not least, he's an educator. Of course, as I already said, through his research, he has educated us already, as many of new generations of economists and macroeconomists followed his steps when designing their research questions and research methodology. But equally importantly, and especially important for this place, the EUI, and for this occasion, the graduation, he was directly involved with many generations and altogether more than 50 graduate students as an advisor. And being courageous and curiosity-driven are also the great traits of a doctoral advisor. Great advisor foster courage of asking the important questions even though they may be difficult, and advise students to go for topics due to curiosity and better understanding of the world instead of ideology, either in politically or scientifically. So now his former students, literally all over the world, are spreading the same approach of research and advising as he did all his career. So now I'm improvising a little bit because by the previous laudatio, I understand a really neat and close connection between our 2 honoris causa doctors. Because I happen to know that Per is a very long-lasting fan of one of the most important and least well-known football club in Sweden, the Falkenbergs FC. And I think if we talk about Christine being worried about results, then we have to be even more sorry about Per recently. And, but closing my laudatio, coming back to my personal note, and I have to make a confession. At the end, we couldn't use him for our football tournament because unfortunately we had our beautifully courageous and curiosity-driven approach to football, but it was not matched well with our stamina and skills, and we finished before he arrived. At the same time, I believe that I convince you that he is the type of scholar who deserves the honor of becoming the honorary doctor of the EUI. Hence, very happily, I present Per Krussel for admission to the honorary degree of Doctor of the European University Institute.
Thank you, Arpad. That was fantastic. I'm not sure it's actually me you're talking about, but I looked around and I couldn't see anybody else on the front row. So it's really a deep honor to receive this honorary degree. I guess in general, but in particular because the EUI is not just any university. It's a university that's singularly focused on producing PhD degrees. It's a definition of a university to award PhDs, but the typical job of a university all around the world is a more basic level of education. And I think, especially in my field, economics, I don't want to tell the graduating students, undergraduates, when they are done with their economics degree that they don't know anything, but unfortunately it's close to true. I think in this area, and I think also in the other social science areas, you really need much deeper research knowledge than basic degrees, and the task of bringing people through PhD studies and beyond is a truly super important one. It used to be that economics was confined to small set of people, usually privileged, also again, never basically women, small set of people who somehow were so smart that they could talk about economics in a convincing way, convince everybody else of the right thing to do. But today, through these PhD programs all around the world, economics is a field that anybody with an interest, ambition, and a willingness to work hard can go into and succeed within. So I think the EUI program in economics, at least, is truly impressive. In my institution in Stockholm, we're certainly keeping track of the people graduating every year, and we hire them regularly. It's a world-class PhD program, and I think you should all be super proud of that. So that's a big congratulations to all of you. That's the good news. The bad news is that actually I also don't think it's enough with a PhD. You're just in the beginning of a lifelong journey of learning, and I think I really must urge you to continue the learning, because yes, you deserve a lot of credit and you deserve a PhD for achieving what you have achieved. But certainly, if I look back at my own education, what I knew then and what I have learned since, I was pretty much nobody at the point of graduating with a PhD. It's a nice looking diploma, but so I think actually it's also a responsibility. Our societies expect you to pay back and keep advancing learning and keep telling the rest of the world what you know and what you will learn from now on. Let me just finish by a personal note and dedicate, to the extent I can use this honorary degree, to dedicate it to somebody. I would dedicate it to my mother. She passed away a little bit less than a year ago after 10 years of Alzheimer's disease, and I know that she wasn't really aware of my successes in academia, partly because of her illness, and she would be extremely happy if she realized that I'm standing here now, and possibly even happier than I am myself. So thank you very much, everybody, and again, thanks. I should say I'm also extra proud to be sharing this degree with Professor Shinken here. So.
By the authority vested in me, I admit you to the honorary degree of Doctor of the European University Institute. Congratulations.
Time for some music, I would say. The performance of the EUI choir under the direction of Valerio del Piccolo is really a tradition at every conferring ceremony. And today, they arrive. Today they will bring 4 pieces. They will bring Springtime Mantlet Every Bough. Second, Drink to Me Only with Thy Eyes. Since Robin Hood. And they will conclude with Love Learns by Laughing. Thank you very much, EUI Choir. That was very nice. Thank you. Now we will proceed with the awards of the doctoral degrees, and we start with the doctoral degrees in history and civilization. Can I ask you to stand up, please? Not yet.
By the authority vested in me, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of History and Civilization.
I call Anita Buhin. Katerina Burkus. Maria Stella Chiarutini. Andreas Richard Dukstad Sanders. Catherine Gibson. Olga Gnidiuk. Matilda Louisa Gregg. John Eric Hansen. Ola Inset. Kimon Markatos. Patrick James McDonough. Nicholas Mitten. Christophe Schellekens. Grazia Shakitano. Georges Souvlis. Sharon Elisheva Turkington. Uros Zver. Doctoral degrees in economics. Can I ask you to stand up, please?
By the authority vested in me, I admit you to the degree of Doctor in Economics.
Giovanni Andreotola. João Carlos Brogueira de Souza. Ricardo Ciacci. Gözde Çorekçioğlu. Benedict Dengler. Carmen García Galindo. Matteo Gatti. Ada Isabel González Torres Fernández. Adam Viktor Jakubik. Matic Petricek. Johanna Laurentia Posch. Lorenzo Verstraeten. Andrea Sebastian Winkler. Milena Witwer. En Vincenz Johannes Sietzemer. Doctoral degrees in law. Can I ask you to stand up, please?
By the authority vested in me, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Laws. Congratulations.
Anna Daniela Alatinolo. Birte Annika Beuk. Elena Brodeala. Alessandro Busca. Patrick Del Duca. Dineke de Vos. Kasper Drewdziewski. Viola Elam. Robin Gadblé. Marion Guerreiro. Francesca Iorlaro. Lamin Kadar. Afroditi Ioanna Marchetu. Alistair McKeever. Liam McHugh Russell. Alberto Horst Neidhardt. Melanie Ariane Swaderer. Mikkel Timmerman. Viorica Vita. Tejan Zunusoha. the doctoral degrees in political and social sciences. Can I ask you to stand up, please?
By the authority vested in me, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Political and Social Sciences.
Argyrios Altiparmakis. Endre Burbat. Björn Christen Bremer. Reto Burgesser. Riccardo Emilio Chesta. Daniela Chironi. Koen Damhuis. Adrien Désiré de Ruiter. Aurélie Figeaud-Chabot. Olga Griasnova. Estelle Herbeau. Jenny Holmsen. Sergio Lipchan. Marie Treban. Angele Miriam Roland. Javier Ruz Soler. Tobias Tesche. Guillem Vidal Lorda. Elisa Volpi. Patrice Wangen. Gorde Jastrebov. Alkistis Savaku. The Master Degrees in Comparative European and International Law. Can I ask you to, you're already standing up. Johannes Graf von Lückner. Non c'erano tutti.
Deve parlare la ragazza ora.
Sì. Katrina Claire Harris. And Philip Franz Konzett. Now, the annual prizes awarded to the best thesis in a number of disciplines will be announced by the Dean of Graduate Studies, Professor Claire Kilpatrick.
Good afternoon. It's a great honour in my capacity as Dean of Graduate Studies at the EUI to introduce to you the three researchers whose theses have been awarded prizes this year. So could I first ask Marco Valbruzzi to come to the stage if he's here? There you are. Marco, you've written a thesis entitled Government Alternation in Western Europe, a Comparative Exploration, under the supervision of Professor Stefano Bartolini, who has supervised a thesis or two at the EUI. And for this, you've been awarded the Linz Rockin Prize for the best doctoral thesis in the field of political sociology, engaging with a theme in the fields of Juan Linz and Stein Rockin's work. Well done. Could I ask the second prize winner to come to the stage? It's Francesca Iorlaro. Francesca, you've written a thesis on the topic of unpuzzling customary international law, the invention of customary law of nations from Francisco de Vitoria de Emer de Vattel, under the supervision of Professor Nihal Butta. And for this, the EUI is awarding you the Antonio Cassese Prize for the best EUI doctoral thesis in international law. Can I finally ask Aphrodite Marketou to come to the stage? Aphrodite, you've written a thesis on local meanings of proportionality, judicial review in France, England, and Greece, under the supervision of Professor Bruno De Vita. And for this, the EUI will award you the Mauro Capelletti Prize for the best doctoral thesis in the field of comparative law. Before inviting you to go before the President and the Secretary General to receive your prizes, I would like to just point out what the prize committees found particularly outstanding about these three theses, all of them on very different topics, but with some key ingredients that led to these prizes being awarded to these three doctoral researchers today. The first is exceptionally high scholarly quality of the work. A second feature in all three of these theses is that they tackled important and difficult questions. So going back to what we heard about being courageous earlier on from our honorary doctorate in economics. The third feature that the prize committees pointed out in all three theses is the meticulous, careful, and insightful work that all three of our prize recipients displayed in their doctoral theses. So I would like to congratulate you very much and invite you now to go before the President.
I would like to invite Dr. Viorica Vita to the pulpit for her salute.
Dear Mr. President, dear professors, colleagues, carissime famiglie, cari amici, stimata audienza, it is a great honor to deliver the salute today. As graduates of this distinguished educational establishment, the European University Institute, we stand in front of you today filled with pride, but at the same time with extreme humbleness. For none of this would have been possible without the unlimited love of our families and friends, without the wise guidance and moral compass of our esteemed supervisors and professors, without the kind support of our academic services and staff, and without the permanent inspiration of the city of Florence, which we shall always carry in our hearts. The EUI has been established in 1972 with the aim to contribute to the cultural and scientific heritage of Europe. Today, 4 decades later, one can affirm with absolute certainty that the EUI has achieved more than that. The EUI has been part of an intellectual and humanist revolution, the ramifications of which go way beyond the confines of the European continent. As dedicated members of 4 departments of economics, law, history and civilization, and political and social sciences, we have worked hard to achieve this common endeavor. In fact, interdisciplinarity has always been at the core of the scientific and culturally rich community of the EUI. Here, I would like to particularly mention some places that have brought departments together and contributed to the birth of interdisciplinary ideas, namely bus number 7, bar fiasco, Coppa Pavone, and certainly today's June Ball. In our work, we always strive to be academically rigorous. We work hard to seek the truth and present it with complete impartiality. I myself have attempted to do the same. Despite this, I, in all honesty, must confess that as a human, I have fallen victim to the human weakness of personal preferences. In everything I did and do, I have expressed my strong preference towards a unified Europe from east to west, towards freedom of speech and thought, towards equal empowerment of women, towards democracy based on human rights and the rule of law. These preferences are strongly informed by the painful history of my home countries. I was born on the other side of the Iron Curtain, a place where freedom had to be fought for. Human rights were an alien concept, and justice was not often served. This is why I cannot stress enough my strong appreciation for this unique place, which has been a safe temple for freedom of speech and thought, an open space for unrestrained ideas, and a safe haven for questioning what we cherish most. In my case, this was Europe. Not even Socrates enjoyed the same privilege. For questioning the status quo, he was sentenced to death and honorably accepted his penalty, even though the law imposed on him was profoundly unjust. As a child of the revolutions of the 90s, I myself would have certainly preferred a dramatically different approach. This brings me to my last message today. Never stop questioning, never stop dreaming, and never stop defending what you believe is worth fighting for. As proud graduates and doctors of this prestigious institute, we have been equipped with the most powerful skill to make a difference in the world: the art of critical thinking. Use it wisely. Thank you. Vi ringrazio.
Thank you, Viorica Vita, for your very important many messages. The ceremony has come to an end, so according to the tradition, the doctors will leave first the church, followed by the professors. So I would like to ask you to remain seated and to be a bit patient until they have left the church. I would also like to ask you to leave, please, your headsets in the chair, on the chairs, so that we can use them next year. And you're all cordially invited to the reception which will be offered on the courtyard in front of the church. And I would like to thank you for your presence, and I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon and a fantastic June ball.